Siffler Mountain belongs to a group of three peaks over 3,100 meters bounded by spreading Loudon and Porcupine Creeks and the Siffler River. All three peaks are rarely ascended due to their remote locations and a lack of good trails in the area. With no recent beta on the Siffler River Trail from the Siffler Falls staging area, Wietze and I spent the first 8 kilometers wondering why we were walking and not on our bikes. After crossing the boundary into the Siffler Wilderness, there was no more talks of biking, I can promise you that. The trail deteriorated significantly, and we spent the next 3.5 hours wading through bog, climbing over and under fallen trees, and bushwhacking on a barely detectable cut-line trail. Water sources were sketchy at best the entire time. Finally, at 13:30 hours, we started up the lower south slopes of Siffler Mountain through a burnt forest. We took the east side of an upper ridge, following it easily into a lovely upper south bowl, and finally scree and slab led us to the 3129 meter summit. We were the first party to sign the register since Rick Collier placed it in 1993, 30 years previous. We descended a slightly different line back through burnt forest and made camp along the Siffler River for the night. We started hiking along the popular trail over the narrow bridge crossing a huge milky North Saskatchewan river. After hiking the boardwalk, we turned right, rather than continuing up the Siffler Falls Trail like I was used to from several scrambles and hikes in the area over the years. I first started wondering why we didn't bring bikes as we hiked a literal road above the North Saskatchewan River. By the time we approached Haley and Katie from Alberta Parks replacing an old Siffler Wilderness Area boundary sign, we knew we'd regret not riding the first 8 kilometers of this approach on return. The girls were very surprised to see us and warned us of rapidly deteriorating trail conditions ahead. We got our first taste of that pretty quickly after crossing into the wilderness area in the form of standing water and bog along the cut line. Yeah, it gives you options. This is familiar. That's what I was walking in 3 days ago. As the trees on either side of the cut line closed in on us, we also realized that with overnight rain, we were in for a good soaking from both sides in addition to the ground. Dang it.
Could be a day. Woo!
Yeah, if you like dry feet, stay home.
Woo!
Well, if you didn't expect wet feet, you're with the wrong person. I'm pretty sure I don't have a single dry trail left. Shortly after the wilderness boundary, the trail deviates off the cut line as the Siffler River interferes with it. There was no way to keep dry as we slowed our pace and tried settling into things, knowing it was only going to get worse. After the brief deviations, we found ourselves back on the cut line in pretty good conditions. Yeah, this was going better than expected. And then we got into it, big time. The next many kilometers were a mixture of tough conditions to absolutely horrid ones. Some of the worst on-trail hiking I've ever done. Hey, an open section.
Woo!
Not representative of the last kilometer. We are in the shit now. Many of you are going to be tempted to downplay just how bad the trail conditions were, but do this at your own peril. I was carrying a ridiculously small and light overnight pack, maybe 13 to 15 pounds in weight and 25 liters in size, and I was seriously struggling. This is not my first rodeo when it comes to difficult travel conditions, as you well know. I honestly believe that most people would turn around if they encountered what we did. Definitely a burn. Even when the deadfall wasn't absolutely horrid, the new growth on the cut line was so thick in places that we kept our jackets on just to protect our arms from getting de-skinned from sharp branches. Ah, that is nice. Whew. Looks like we're mostly back out of the last burn. We might get back into it at some point. Over. Another wild place. Wow. After almost 2.5 hours of brutal conditions, we finally came to an intersection with another cut line heading off to the southwest and eventually our destination. This cut line was no better than the previous one. Maybe cut line spot. Eventually we got into the result of the 2018 Porcupine wildfire, which certainly didn't help things. Road bed's a little obscure through here, but we're in a burn, so... Finally, after 4 hours of very tough travel conditions, we found ourselves near the south ascent slopes of Siffler Mountain. Although 4 hours doesn't sound that long, I believe that most folks would double this time with bigger packs and less Dutch in their jeans. I can't even imagine ducking under and climbing over all the trees we did with a regular size overnight pack. As we suspected, it turns out that the actual ascent of Siffler Mountain is the easiest part of the whole endeavor. As we neared treeline on steep burnt south slopes, we were met with a steep ridge abutting our slope. Our choice was right or left, and we chose climbers right, hoping to find a route into the upper hanging valley. I think so.
Way back, you might have a better view of what's on top.
That's right.
We've got changing options.
That's the end of the grass. After hiking through the lovely upper hanging valley, the angle ramped up as these things tend to do, and I tried to find solid slabs and rubble to ascend. Views back over the approach were stunning, as was the sight of Mount Fuhrer rising in the distance over the Siffler River. Wow. The upper south slopes of Siffler Mountain remained very easy scrambling. As I finally topped out near the summit, the views over a dying glacier to colorful tarns far below were stunning. Wow, look at those lakes down there. Through that valley. Another big lake right there. What a day. Summit of Siffler Mountain. That's been a few years in the making, I'll tell you. There was no smoke or clouds to interfere with far-reaching views as I approached the summit cairn and reached for a familiar-looking register, sitting pretty as you please as if placed only yesterday. Nervously, I opened it and unwrapped what I knew was definitely a Collier artifact. As I flipped the first page, indeed signed by Collier 30 years ago, I was delighted to note no more entries. Well, there you have it. Rick Collier, 93. No entries since. Basically a walk-up. Just a long walk. All the way from there.
It felt like putting my belt in strap.
Yeah, exactly. After almost an hour at the summit, we started slowly down, enjoying the soft scree and dirt next to the more solid slabs and rubble we'd ascended. Some peaks are like this, pretty solid on ascent with loose, fast options on descent. As we walked out of the upper hanging valley, we wondered what the other side of the abutment ridge would be like for descent, and decided to give it a try. We descended very steep scree slopes into another valley before exiting steep forest to our waiting gear below. We'd now decided to make Mount Fuhrer our objective for the following day and descended to the Siffler River to find a place to camp for the night. After a late supper, we crawled into our sleeping bags for a night under a very bright moon, with the river drowning out any noises that might normally keep us awake. After ascending Siffler Mountain the day before, Wietze and I decided to attempt Mount Fuhrer on Sunday, July 30th, 2023. Once again, we had zero beta for our route. Crossing the river was the crux of our day. We hiked to the Porcupine Creek inlet and crossed the raging creek before attempting the Siffler River, which worked well. Once again, we ascended steep burned slopes to a huge northwest scree and rubble valley. We followed the valley to its southeast end and ascended scree and rubble to incredible views of Abstruse Peak and the Fuhrer Lakes far below. We traversed the easy south ridge to the summit. From there we descended a more northerly line on firm scree and rubble back to the hanging valley and retraced our route across the river and creek back to camp. After a morning coffee, Wietze and I started out from camp, hoping to cross the Siffler River nearby. Alas, this idea quickly faded. For the next kilometer or so, we kept trying different crossings of a fast-flowing milky river, and every time we'd get over knee-deep and back out of the strong current. After the fourth failed attempt, I got an idea to cross Porcupine Creek first before crossing the Siffler River upstream of the confluence. This worked great, and we managed to find a reasonable crossing of both water systems, no issues. In almost a carbon copy of the day before, our on-sighted ascent route to what Collier dubbed Chortling Marmot's Creek worked perfectly. Collier doubted this route would work, but we hiked easily up steep burned slopes until traversing into the upper creek and long rubble valley leading to a far col that was our next target. After conquering the approach to the upper valley, all that remained was finding the summit. You'd think that would be obvious, but it wasn't in this case. We had a labeled high point on Gaia, but those aren't always correct. Without any detailed research beforehand, we had to trust Gaia and make up our own minds once we got there. A northwest outlier peak looked to be very similar in height and was reachable from the marked summit, so we weren't too worried. The first task was a long rubble valley and ascending to the high call in the distance. Once again, things progressed easily, and despite some loose rubble, we grunted our way along, and 3.5 hours after leaving camp, we had our first dramatic views of Abstruse Peak, Mount Perrin, from above the col.
Holy. Wow. There are the Fear Lakes.
I had to see if there were better views over the Fear Lakes, so I took an extra 15 minutes to descend a ridge a bit to the south and found even better views. I couldn't believe the grand scene that awaited me. I joined Witsa back up on the south ridge towards our still distant summit. I was surprised when he told me it was still a kilometer away. Views off the sheer rock walls of Führer's east face with Witsa hiking over it were absolutely stunning in the early morning light. Despite having some pre-trip concerns re forest fire smoke, when we reached the summit 4.5 hours from camp we had reasonably clear morning views, especially to giant peaks to the south and west. We still had a long day ahead of us, and after 30 minutes at the uncairned summit, we built a small cairn and reluctantly left the amazing scene for a stumble down harsh rubble and hard-pan scree to the chortling Marmots Creek far below. We took a much different line on descent than we did on approach, avoiding retracing our steps all the way to the col and descending more direct west slopes instead. This worked well, but took a long time due to the solid nature of the rubble, once again not like the loose scree on Siffler Mountain the day previous. Once out of the upper valley, we descended steep grass and burnt slopes to the Siffler River below. The river almost seemed a bit clearer and lower than earlier in the day and posed no issues. Porcupine Creek was lively, but also seemed a bit easier than earlier in the day. We were happy to be done with our water cruxes of the trip and could now focus on the horrid egress waiting for us. If the approach was long and arduous with wet undergrowth and difficulties, the exit only a day later in the heat of the day wasn't any easier. Clearly, Alberta Parks has zero desire to make this end of the Siffler Wilderness any more accessible. I'm not even sure I want them to. There's enough busy areas in the Rockies backcountry nowadays, but I am surprised they bothered replacing that old sign.
Somebody will follow us.
We had to keep our rain jackets on exit just to protect our skin from sharp tree branches and the myriads of bugs including flies and mosquitoes. As we hiked hour after hour, T-storms built up behind us and gave us some relief from the afternoon summertime heat. A few raindrops was the only result of all that build-up, but we didn't mind. Finally, we reached the newly installed wilderness boundary sign, not where the maps say it should be, by the way, and we're left with an 8-kilometer slog. Once again wondering why the heck we didn't bring our bikes for that. At some point in the last 8 kilometers, I developed a very painful blister on the big toe of my right foot. I could barely limp along and had to practice some focused mind tricks to fool my body that there was no issue. Thankfully it worked, and 30 minutes after barely being able to walk, I was striding along as if my toe wasn't bleeding anymore, and it most certainly was. I find pain fascinating, and having the ability to shut it down is very handy on 36-kilometer days like this one.